Musk was pushing for his own office very close to the Oval Office in the West Wing, but his senior team for the Department of Government Efficiency is going to be actually in a different building in the White House complex. And Trump himself has now confirmed that that's where Elon Musk's office will be. And that, I'm told, is regarded as a small victory for the chief of staff. One of her main jobs, of course, is to keep Trump focused and to keep people out of the Oval Office who might distract him.
Well, in his inaugural address, he set out a wide-ranging and ambitious agenda. He enacted much of it within hours in a sweeping raft of executive orders, from declaring a state of national emergency on the border, withdrawing America from the World Health Organization, and pardoning more than 1,500 people convicted over the January 6th insurrection. All this has happened at such a pace, and with his agenda having such far-reaching implications for the world and the UK, that we're going to take a closer look at some of what's been announced now. And to do that, I can welcome David Charter, Associate Editor of The Times in DC, and Sarah Elliott, spokesperson for the Republicans overseas. But before we get into it, David, you've got a piece that I've just read on The Times about how President Trump's chief of staff has frozen out Elon Musk.
That's right. One of the battles that's been going on behind the scenes, certainly for Susie Wiles, who's the first female chief of staff, a highly respected operator from Florida who brought professionalism to Trump's campaign of the type that had never been seen before in his previous campaigns. Well, one of her personal goals is to try and keep Elon Musk a little bit more distant from Trump. As you probably noticed, he's been omnipresent, certainly since Trump won the election. He moved into a little cottage in the grounds of Mar-a-Lago so he could reside with the Trump family. And Musk was pushing for his own office very close to the Oval Office in the West Wing. But his senior team for the Department of Government Efficiency is going to be actually in a different building in the White House complex. And Trump himself has now confirmed that that's where Elon Musk's office will be. And that, I'm told, is regarded as a small victory for the chief of staff. One of her main jobs, of course, is to keep Trump focused and to keep people out of the Oval Office who might distract him. And because, let's face it, everybody in America wants a piece of Trump at the moment. Everybody wants a few minutes with him, and none more so than Elon Musk.
And how significant a snub do you actually think this is? Will it have much difference to, or will it have an impact on the unit that, of course, Elon Musk has set up? Do we think it has any bearing on how significant he thinks his task is?
I don't think so. I also think it's probably not an end to the matter, because Musk is a pretty impossible person to control, much as Trump is. And I think the concerns for Wiles and in the West Wing is all this talk of Musk being the shadow president or the real vice president or something like that, simply because he's so active, but it's also resented a bit inside because he's such a recent convert to the cause. He only supported Trump from last summer, and he does seem to be pushing a lot of his own agendas. So it's just an indication that she's trying to keep that critical distance. I hesitate to say put Elon Musk in his place, because that's impossible, and I think she knows that very well. But this is sort of round one, I think, to the chief of staff.
Okay, and if we can talk about tariffs now, I'm sure we'll come back to Wiles there, but let's start with what wasn't enacted in an executive order. Sarah, if I can bring you in, Sarah Elliott, spokesperson for Republican overseas there. The president said he's considering a 10% tariff on China, 25% on Canada and Mexico, and he singled that other countries are offenders and could face the same fate, including the EU. How worried do you think his Starmer should be about this?
I think there's room to be concerned. You need to think about how much, if you want to have American businesses, American agricultural products, have market access to the United Kingdom. That's what President Trump wants. His associates, his employees, will be looking at all the different sectors and relationships around the world and assessing who are the best people to do business with and how, and then assessing if it's necessary to use tariffs or not. And Donald Trump is using tariffs not just for economic reasons, but also to change, for example, other types of policy, like foreign policy. So with Mexico and Canada, it's because he wants to stop the flow of illegals and drugs into the country. They've already responded positively to these threats. Canada has put more money towards border security, and Mexico has agreed to the Remain in Mexico program, which means that if you're an illegal immigrant coming from that side of the border, that you remain in Mexico until your asylum claim is adjudicated. So he is seeing Mexico and Canada play ball using this tool, and so he expects to use it potentially. I'm just saying potentially with the United Kingdom. Let's say if he doesn't like something regarding the Chagos Islands deal in the Indian Ocean, or if he doesn't like violations of free speech that are taking place in the United Kingdom, people getting arrested for tweets, etc. So it'll be interesting to see if he will apply tariffs on the UK. But I don't think they're exempt per se.
And I mean, David, if I can just get your thoughts on that. In Westminster, we've reported a couple of senior government sources saying that they're doubtful that there could be tariffs placed by Donald Trump because he cares about inflation and he cares about the pockets and the depth of the pockets of those who voted for him. What do you think about that? Do you think from Washington that seems like a realistic or perhaps too naive a hope from some policymakers in Westminster?
Oh, I definitely think that's what UK diplomats over here are trying to impress upon anyone and everyone they can speak to in the Trump circle. And we've actually just this morning, about an hour ago, Trump was asked if the balanced trade that the UK has would affect his decision. And he replied, yeah, unbalanced and balanced, and also deficits. Like with Canada, we lose 200 billion a year. And then he went off on a diatribe against Canada. But just that little indication that the fact that he didn't argue directly about the UK, and that he then went on to talk about how unfair the trade with Canada is, which has a massive surplus in goods, not in services, but services doesn't seem to be in Trump's mind, which is just as well for the UK, because we have a surplus in services, but not in goods. So it looks like the Brits are succeeding in perhaps in getting the message across, and that he simply hasn't made a decision yet. And I have to say, on the bigger question, there's two schools of thought in those advising and around Trump. There's one group who think that this is mainly, I think, as Susan was suggesting, it's mainly a threat to try and get policy wins for Trump, and that we may see people strung along a little bit while Trump raises the prospect of tariffs and tries to get gains for America. The other school of thought is that he's genuinely convinced by the argument that he should reorientate the American economy away from personal taxes and towards tariffs, as it was at the end of the 19th century. And the people who think that that's on his mind point to his phrase in his inaugural address saying there's going to be a new golden age for America. Well, this could refer to Reagan's phrase about a golden age, but it could also refer to what's called the Gilded Age, the Gilded Era. And that's the late 19th century, when America didn't have personal taxes. It only had border tariffs. And Trump has frequently talked about how America was richest then under President McKinley, brackets, he wants to rename a mountain in Alaska after President McKinley, because he was impressed that he ran his economy based on border import tariffs.
I think with a lot of these multinational organizations, they very much like the U.S. tax dollar, but what do they really give back to the U.S. taxpayer? And that is all about the America First agenda for Donald Trump. And you have to remember that WHO handled quite poorly COVID 5 years ago when it was first coming out, and praised the way that Beijing and China dealt with it when actually they didn't crack down on it. They were not transparent with the world. And they weren't honest about what was happening. So I think as Donald Trump reevaluates how America's largesse is spent around the world, these are low-hanging fruit for Americans, and they keep to President Trump's promises made, promises kept.
I mean, David, what do you think about the overall response to this? Because it's obviously been pointed out that Trump was wrong to say that the US paid 500 million and that China paid 39 million. In fact, it was something closer to 130 million for the US, I think, and China something closer to 88 million. But clearly, this is not about the funding for the WHO necessarily. It's also about Trump's approach to international organizations. And I wonder if you think there'll be a sharp backlash on this, or whether it will get lost in the great many things that Trump has done in his first few days.
Yeah, I mean, it's not one of the issues that's being hotly debated in Washington. It was very much expected because he did it in his first term. He pulled America out. Joe Biden put Washington back in. Just as with the Paris Climate Accord, this was very, very much on the cards. And it just fits with Trump's America First worldview. He doesn't really see the point of a lot of these international organizations that sprung up, in fact, after the Second World War, because he just feels that America is the largest contributor and doesn't get. It's not just it doesn't get value for money. It is, as Susan was suggested, that he feels misled by the organization during COVID, obviously looking for others to blame for the handling of a COVID-19 pandemic, which was pretty poor in America. And I would just say, I think the main takeaway for me is just how China is on his mind and is at the root of a lot of his instinctive decisions that he wants to make. It's China that he feels has gained control of the World Health Organization narrative on COVID, which is not accepting to look into whether there was anything more than the sporadic outbreak, if you like, in Wuhan, whether it was more determinative than that, which is a big conspiracy theory, of course, in Trump world. So I think that's what is at the root of this. And as I say, it fits in with his idea that these institutions were created for very sound reasons after the Second World War, like the United Nations, but they've become bloated and frankly rather useless.
Okay, well, let's talk about Ukraine, which is, of course, a subject on many people's minds at the moment. Not long ago, President Trump was promising a swift end to the war in Ukraine. That hasn't happened, but he did use his address in Davos yesterday to call for peace. Later in the week, President Trump called on Putin to make a deal with Ukraine. The Kremlin has responded by stepping up attacks across Ukraine. Sarah, if I can get your thoughts on what you think Trump's next steps will be over the coming days to try and secure a peace deal in Ukraine.
Well, I think he'll be speaking to Vladimir Putin and Zelensky, and I think he will withdraw aid to Ukraine. He is not going to just have this endless supply of ammunition and supplies and money to the country. And he's been very clear about what he wants. He wants to see an end to this, and he wants to move on. His focus in his presidency, he wants to be not Europe, but containing China, who is an economic and military adversary. So this is, I think he genuinely does not like the bloodshed that has taken place, and nor do Americans, I might add. But there are many wildfires to put out, no pun intended, in the United States right now and other places around the world, and he wants to end that devastating war.
And I mean, David, if I can ask you, how successful do you anticipate Trump being in the next couple of days in making progress on this issue? He's obviously got a lot of other things that he needs to do, but he did promise to try and look at this very quickly.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure about the horizon of a couple of days. Of course, he said he would end it on day one. That was his campaign promise, and it hasn't happened. It's a promise that his supporters will easily overlook and forgive him for at the moment. But what his support base doesn't want is to see more American funding going to Ukraine. They're really over that, and that's why also Trump made a big show of visiting North Carolina, the storm damage there today. I think what might surprise people is the way that Trump put out a post on his Truth Social site this week, threatening tariffs on Russia if they didn't come to the table. Threatening sanctions on Russia if they didn't come to the table and start negotiations, because he does lack a certain leverage over Putin. He said several times that Zelensky has told him he wants to do a deal. We've had no such indication from Russia. He has appointed an envoy, a respected former general called Keith Kellogg, who I believe is traveling to Kiev pretty soon. But again, that we're going to see soon, I think, a pretty high stakes meeting between Trump and Putin, which I heard was being set up for February. And that's when we'll get an indication of whether Russia's prepared to deal.
And how urgent do you think Trump will see that deal in terms of on that particular meeting? If we're not going to see it until February, do you not think we'll get any indication until on where we're going until then?
Well, the indication, of course, is that he wants a deal, and as I say, it was really surprising to a lot of people that he's applying quite a lot of pressure to Russia. You know, there was the conspiracy theory among on the left was that he was in the pocket of Russia, and yet he's been pretty tough actually in his language to Putin to try and set this up to get a deal. I have written, and I believe it's true, that what Trump feels he deserves already is a Nobel Peace Prize, and I feel there's a lot of agreement in I think in America that if he gets a deal for Ukraine, he'll deserve it.
We're going to have to stop you there, but thank you so much. That was David Charter, Associate Editor of The Times in DC, and Sarah Elliott, spokesperson for Republican Overseas, talking through those first breathless few days of the Trump presidency with me there.